Hey Internet, I'm back. Now this is not a game review, because I really just haven't played anything that I thought was worth reviewing recently. However, I did want to make a video because something insane happened the other day, and I figured we should talk about it. A graded, sealed copy of Super Mario 64 went for sale online with Heritage Auctions, and it sold for $1.5 million. And that's insane. Now, start grading, for those of you that don't know, was originally created in the comic book and trading card industries as a way to guarantee the item that you were buying would match the description that the seller gave to the item. Basically, this would stop someone from putting up some sort of listing or auction in like a newspaper or magazine, because this well predates the internet. They would put up an ad saying, hey, I have Action Comics #1 in mint condition. So you would buy it, and then what you would receive would be Action Comics number 101. Or it would be Action Comics #1, but it would be in terrible condition with all sorts of tears and rips and creases. There was a lot of things that could go wrong. So by having the item graded and then providing the information from the grade, for example, saying that I have Action Comics #1 graded at an 8.0, that would tell the person on the other side that, okay, I know what condition this is because I know what condition 8.0 notates and what that means for the comic, and because it's now inside this hard acrylic case with the official, certificate at the top of the grading, I am going to get exactly what I expect out of this auction and can, bid confidently. So that was the purpose of grading. It was never meant to inflate the value of something. It was only supposed to basically be buyer's insurance. It was supposed to ensure that you got what you were expecting. That was it. However, what we've seen recently, specifically with video game grading, is that grading is now being used as a tool to artificially inflate prices of things. The value of a game will absolutely skyrocket because it is graded. And unfortunately, these grades don't really mean much with video games. The difference between, well, I guess to start, a comic book would almost never get a grade of anything 9.0 or above. It's just almost unheard of in comics. I mean, maybe something just out of the box to a comic shop and it hasn't been touched by anyone yet, that might have a 9.0. But even then, the people that packed it in the box, even the people in the warehouse, the printing company that made it, someone may have touched it along the way and now it has a thumbprint or a tiny crease. It may have rattled in the box and slightly dinged a corner. Like, there's so many things that could go wrong that a 9.0 is almost unheard of in comics. However, in games, you seem to get 8.5, 9.0, 9.5, 9.8 fairly frequently. And the ratings don't mean as much as they would have in the other industries, and they're also not as necessary. For games, it's a lot more evident that things are what they're explained to be, and so the grading's not as necessary. And also now, it's really just being used as a tool to inflate the price. People spend a bunch of money to have a game graded, and then they put a tag on the game trying to sell it at double, triple, or sometimes exponentially greater prices than it would normally go for otherwise. Some have speculated, specifically with this most recent example, that this is actually due to just poorly veiled money laundering. These overpriced, graded games give people an excellent way to buy what seems like a legitimate item at an obnoxious price and then launder money. Now, obviously, none of us can prove that that's happening, but let me explain what happened here with this auction, and then you can see what you think. So on the 12th, which was yesterday, at least at the time of filming this, a sealed copy of Mario 64, for the Nintendo 64 obviously, sold for $1.5 million. Now, as you know, this is a fairly common Nintendo 64 game. There are over almost 12 million copies of it sold and produced and are out in the world. And while I'm sure a lot of them aren't in sealed conditions, and even the ones that are, let's just say the one for auction is the only one that would have been graded at a 9.8, meaning it's basically immaculate. Shigeru Miyamoto and God themselves both came down and hand sealed this game and then kissed it just for insurance. It's a perfect game. It went for $1.5 million. To put that into context, a month ago, to the day actually, on June 12th, a sealed copy of Mario 64 sold on eBay. And it sold for $1,800. Now, for those of you that don't do math as much, that's about 1/1000th of the price. So that means that if that person didn't benefit from grading in the way that grading would traditionally benefit you, and let's say the copy they got was counterfeited or was a lesser condition than they were expecting, they could buy another one 999 more times before they pay the same amount as the Heritage auction. And also, I will point out that even though you don't necessarily have the insurance that grading gives you, which I'll get into more about that and if it actually gives you that insurance, but even if you didn't have that, most auction sites now give you some sort of buyer insurance. eBay, for example, while certainly not the best and absolutely has flaws with its buyer protections, if you get something that's blatantly counterfeit or not at all like it was described, eBay will give you most or all of your money back. So let's say that someone did buy that $1,800 copy and it turned out to be a counterfeit. It wasn't a sealed copy of Mario 64, it was an unsealed copy of Superman 64. They would get those $1,800 back, or even maybe $1,500, or whatever the case is. They would get a majority of that money back. So the amount of times they would have to try and fail to buy a copy on eBay to come close to this $1.5 million number is just astronomical. And this isn't necessarily an isolated incident either. Not too long ago, the same thing happened with Legend of Zelda. It was actually only about a week ago, on the 9th, that a sealed graded copy of Legend of Zelda for the NES went for $780,000. Also through Heritage Auctions, and also graded through whichever company grades for them. I think it's VGA, but I don't know. One of the grading companies. Money launderers, basically. But that same day, the same day that auction ended and that ridiculous price happened, another sealed and graded copy, by the way, was listed on eBay and sold for $25,000. Now, again, I'll do the math for you here, and that's 31 times more than the eBay copy. So a bit inflated, a bit ridiculous. And now I just want to say that these prices, the 78 or 780,000 and the 1.5 million, they're not just obscene amounts of money on their own. They're not just ridiculous because of how cheap you can get those games for otherwise. They're just ridiculous for games in general. Games never go for that much money. For example, Stadium Events. You may be familiar. If you don't, let me give you a quick rundown. Stadium Events is a game that was originally made and produced for the NES in '87, and it was published by Bandai. They published an initial run of 10,000 copies. Shortly after it came out, Nintendo bought the rights to the game, and all subsequent printings were done under Nintendo and were branded with Nintendo on the box and not Bandai. So only the initial 10,000 copy run of the Bandai branded boxes exists. That's it. That's how many there are. Not 12 million, 10,000. And that game is significantly older than Super Mario 64. That game, a sealed copy was found and sold in auction in 2015. And that went for $42,000. way, way shy of $780,000. And that's one of the rarest games for the NES, which is one of the most known and most collected for consoles in the game industry. And speaking of rare NES titles, the Nintendo World Championship card, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. We all know how rare that is and how exclusive it is to have a copy and how hard they are to find. In 2020, so last year, the year that we all saw the Corona Collectathon happen and the values for basically every collectible, including video games, skyrocketed, a copy of that game went for $130,000, which is 10 times lower than the sealed Mario 64. So there's no precedent in the game industry or game collecting or anything like that for a $1.5 million game. That's absolutely unheard of. Like, it's not just a new record like, oh hey, it's been progressing and this is where we are now. No. It's like, oh, games are usually around here, there's a couple outliers that spike up a little, and then there's this frickin' thing that's way up here and just incredibly unreasonable. That's what happened. And to really demonstrate that, and then I'll stop harping, I went through my wish list of games, and with the help of price charting and eBay and what looks like the most recent BuzzFeed-esque list of the rarest consoles out there, here's some things that you could get for the $1.5 million. You could get a sealed copy of Panzer Dragoon Saga, the Donkey Kong Country competition cards, the Star Fox Super Weekend competition cards, both the gray and gold Nintendo World Championship cards, a Panasonic Q console with the controller and Game Boy player, Air Raid for the 2600, all 3 Sword Quest titles sealed for the 2600, Custer's Revenge sealed, Tengen Tetris for the Genesis sealed, Pepsi Invaders, the Nintendo PlayStation prototype of which there is only one, Beatles Rock Band Xbox 360 console, Cubivore for the GameCube, sealed of course, Hotel Mario and all 3 Zeldas for the CDI, all also sealed. Oh, and by the way, that's not any one of those items for the list, that's the whole list of those things you could get for that $1.5 million. And actually I'm lying, because I did the math and looked up the values, and you can get them all for just under half of that. So those are some of the rarest and most valuable games and consoles out there, and you can get them all for half of what one copy of a sealed common game for the Nintendo 64 just sold for. And as I said before, this is a problem because it artificially drives up prices. For example, once the news broke of this, everyone started talking about it. I'm in a lot of forums and threads and groups, and I like to be in places where game collectors talk to each other. So I try to stay up on this kind of news, I try to talk to these people and see what the trends are and what's selling and what everyone's buying and this and that. And everyone was talking about this immediately. And of course, because this game is trending and it's getting news articles and it's getting press, if you look at eBay right now, prices of this game are ridiculous. As I said, a month ago, 1 month, 30 days, 31 days, however many it's been, because I don't remember how many months June has, this game sold for $1,800, which that's not completely unreasonable for a sealed 64 game, especially a popular one from a mainline Nintendo IP. However, if you look right now, a month and a day later, at eBay, and just look at copies, both graded and not graded, that are sealed, you'll see they're all being listed for 3 times as much, 5 times as much, 10 times as much. In fact, here's a screenshot right here of a search I literally did earlier today on eBay for sealed Mario 64 listings. That's insane. That kind of inflation in a single month is almost unheard of. Games didn't inflate that much over the last year when everyone stayed at home, had expendable income, and like I mentioned earlier, basically had the Corona Collectathon going on. This kind of inflation from this one article, it's insane. It artificially drove up prices because nothing's more scarce. The game's not any harder to find than it was before. It's not any more rare than it was before. You know, no one announced that 100,000 copies were just found and destroyed. nothing major happened to the game to make it more valuable or more rare. However, the prices significantly jumped anyway. And I know that these kinds of inflations and increases are to be expected. It's a way of life, it's part of the collecting. I've been doing this long enough that I know that I've experienced it myself. A long time ago, I had an opportunity to buy the Donkey Kong Country competition card, which is still the #1 get in my gaming wish list. That is my holy grail. And I had the opportunity to buy it for $200, and I did not do that. Because at the time, it was just a lot of money that I did not have and could not afford, so I didn't pick it up. About a decade later, I saw another copy in the wild. This was only the second time I had seen one in person in the wild, with that $200 example being the first time. And it was being listed, or the person selling it was asking for $2,000. So that's some pretty good inflation. That's 10 times the price. However, that 1,000% inflation happened over the course of a decade. It is a very long time for that price to steadily inflate. And that game is actually rare. It's very hard to find copies of that, especially ones in good condition with the case and all of that. So the price increase is justified. It makes sense for something that rare and that unique, where listings are very few and far between. If you look online right now, you can't even find any genuine listings for it. That makes sense. That's what you expect. However, a 100,000% increase on an incredibly common 3D platformer from the Nintendo 64 era, which, let's be honest, was not the best era for games, that's unheard of. That's not inflation that anyone would reasonably expect, especially in a 1 month's time. And before you all hate on me, love the 64. There's a lot of games for it that I play, that I remember fondly, that I have in my collection. It's fine. It's just that realistically, if you look at it, it's in that weird era of gaming where the graphics don't age well enough to where you want to replay the games, and they don't. The games aren't necessarily as great that you can overlook the graphics either. Like, I know you have nostalgia goggles on for some of these games, like Mario 64, but really, if you go back and play it objectively, it's not a great game. The camera angles are just awful. We all know that. And all the content that was in the DS port of the game honestly should have been in the 64 port of the game, with multiple players and selectable characters and all the extra stuff. It's not great. And that's just one example of one of the major games. Obviously, you can look at other ones like Superman 64 that show you just how bad the bad games in that console can be. Like, it was really just a mess. But that's a tangent. I don't need to harp on that. Really, to get back to the point here is the kind of inflation we're seeing with this auction and what it's doing to the market and to the other games and stuff out there. Really, it's not great. Like, unless you're a really rich person that's trying to launder money by buying overpriced collectibles, this should not make you happy. And let me end on one last point to just really make my argument again, even though I've done it a bunch of times, I feel like. The Straw Museum of Play, which is a museum that specializes in toys and games. They preserve and archive and collect up every example of toys and games that they can, and they just try to, make sure that they will always be accessible. But one of the things they do is video games. They play the games on genuine hardware, and they record footage of the game to preserve that gameplay for future generations. So even if the games themselves are not playable, if the quality of the cartridge or the cassette or the disc or whatever degrades to the point that you can't play it, or the hardware is no longer available or usable, you still at least have archived footage so you can see what the game looked like, and it can be recreated from that. Granted, that's a harder thing to do, but it's at least something that can be done. We've seen, games recreated by fans just from screenshots in a magazine or a single 2-second clip from a promo video at a conference. So it is doable. But the Straw Museum, several years ago, I think it was actually 8 years ago because I'm that old, they purchased a collection online. It was a very large collection from a private collector in Japan, and he had previously listed the collection online as one that had over 7,000 games, including the complete library for 18 different consoles. This was a massive collection he had spent a long time amassing. And he had sold the collection for 1.3, was it 1.3 or 1.2? It was $1.2 million. However, the buyer in that transaction, the person that was supposed to buy the collection from him, ended up not. The money never came through, so the seller never sold him the games. Well, he sold him the games, he never sent him the games. So Strong came in, and for an undisclosed amount, probably less than the 1.2, bought the collection from him. So let's assume they did pay the amount. They bought 7,000 games for 1.2 million. Included in that was Tenjin Tetris, which was a unlicensed and very hard to find and sought after game for the Sega Genesis. And they got a copy complete in box. And there was a number of other games. I could go on forever listing all the rare or hard to find or foreign import titles that were in this collection, but suffice to say, it's 7,000 games, all in complete condition, including, like I said, 18 full libraries for different consoles. All of that was $300,000 less than one single copy of Mario 64. So if you find me any collector anywhere in the world who thinks that a single sealed game from a mediocre era of gaming is worth more than one of the biggest private collections ever, I want to meet that person, because I will gladly sell them any number of sealed games that I have. But for everyone else out there, if your last name isn't Gates or Bezos, then this is just bad news. If prices really go this way and collectible games become just a tool for rich people to spread money around and potentially launder it, then it's going to destroy collecting for everybody. The prices of hard-to-find games, or even common games that are just in above-average condition, it's going to be impossible for anyone to find them. No one's getting to enjoy the hobby of gaming or game collecting anymore. It will all be priced out of it. So really, this whole thing is just a precautionary tale that don't buy into the hype. If you see these articles, because we've seen 2 in about a week's time now, I suspect there will be more. When you see these auctions, and you see these articles, and you see these ridiculous prices attached, don't buy into them. Understand that it's rich people playing stupid games with their money, and it has nothing to do with the reality of game collecting or the game industry or the actual value of any of these games. Mario 64 is not rare, it is not incredibly valuable. No one should be paying 7 figures for it. You should not even be paying 6, arguably not even 5 figures for it. That's just not realistic. It's not what should be happening, but it is, so we all just need to know that it's happening and know to ignore it, or else game collecting is just gonna get destroyed for all of us. And that's the video. That's all I have to say. Yeah, I don't know. Go about your lives, and eventually I'll review something, assuming I can still afford to buy games in the future. Bye!